Picture this. It's about 160,000 years ago. You're technically a human, but you'd look more like a hairy cousin of one. You crack your eyes open somewhere in East Africa. You stretch, you look out over the grassland, and not one single thought in your head says, you know what would really make this morning perfect? A shirt. And yet, here we are. Every single morning, billions of us do the exact same weird ritual. We put on pants. We put on socks. We stand in front of a closet full of stuff and somehow still say we have nothing to wear. We've built entire industries, entire economies, entire legal systems around fabric. Seriously, walk outside without enough of it on and the police will show up. We made laws about how much of our own skin we're allowed to show. Think about how strange that actually is. So today, we're figuring out why. Where did this all start? And why did we do it when literally no other animal on Earth bothered? A gorilla's never needed a hoodie. A wolf's never needed boots. An orca's survived in freezing water for millions of years with zero wardrobe. So why us? Before we get into it, if you're new here, hit subscribe. And if this kind of deep dive stuff is your thing, smash that like button. It genuinely helps this channel grow. Okay, let's get into it. The short answer to when did clothes start is nobody knows for sure. The long answer is way weirder, and it involves a parasite that most people spend their whole lives trying to avoid. Stick around, because that detail alone is one of the strangest pieces of detective work in modern science. The hairless problem. Let's start with something you've probably never thought about. Humans are almost the only large mammal walking around with barely any fur. Look at any other big mammal. Bears, wolves, gorillas, horses, elephants. Every single one is covered head to toe. Then you've got us, standing there in the middle of the animal kingdom looking plucked, patchy, and a little sunburned, like evolution started a jacket and forgot to finish it. Scientists have a leading theory here, and it comes down to temperature control. As our ancestors moved out of the shady forests and into open grassland, they started running, a lot, chasing prey over long distances in blazing heat. A full fur coat in that situation is basically a death sentence. You'd overheat, your body would shut down, and you'd collapse before you even caught dinner. So over an enormous stretch of time, we traded the fur for something else. Sweat glands. Millions of them. Somewhere between 2 and 4 million scattered across our skin. We are, hands down, the best sweating mammal on the planet. If sweating were an Olympic sport, humans would sweep every medal. Great in Africa. Absolutely useless in a snowstorm. Which is exactly where clothing had to step in. A timeline that doesn't add up. Here's the tidy version of the story that most people assume is true. Humans left Africa, got cold somewhere up north, wrapped an animal skin around themselves. Done. Nice and simple. Except the dates don't line up. Genetic evidence, and we're getting to exactly how in a second, points to humans wearing clothing somewhere between 90,000 and 170,000 years ago. But large-scale migration out of Africa didn't really kick off until roughly 60,000 to 70,000 years ago. So if the whole point of clothing was staying warm somewhere cold, why does the evidence show up tens of thousands of years before anyone even left the continent? Something else was happening first. Something that has less to do with the weather and a lot more to do with being human. And that brings us to the parasite. The bug that solved the mystery. A team of geneticists spent years mapping the family tree of a creature nobody wants to talk about. Lice. Turns out there are 2 separate kinds that live on humans. Head lice, which live in your hair, and body lice, which live exclusively in fabric. The seams, the folds, the fibers of clothing. These are 2 genetically distinct branches, and at some point, body lice split off from head lice entirely. Here's why that's such a big deal. Body lice physically cannot survive without clothing. No fabric, no home, no food source, no survival. Which means the exact moment that species split away from head lice is basically the exact moment humans started wearing clothes regularly enough to create an entirely new habitat for a bug. When scientists ran the genetic clock backward, they landed on a window between roughly 80,000 and 170,000 years ago for that split. A parasite, one of the most despised creatures in human history. The thing that causes school-wide panic and ruins sleepovers, accidentally became the oldest recorded evidence of human clothing. The lice figured out we got dressed before we did. So, what was the actual reason? If clothing predates our migration out of Africa, warmth clearly wasn't the starting point. So, what was? Theory 1, basic protection. Not from cold, but from sun, from thorns, from biting insects, from scraping yourself raw walking through rough terrain all day chasing animals. A simple wrap of hide creates a barrier between your skin and everything trying to cut it open. Not exciting, not symbolic, just practical. Sometimes the boring theory really is the correct one. Theory 2 is the interesting one: social signaling. Humans are obsessed with status. It's baked into us. We constantly broadcast who we are, what group we belong to, whether you should trust us or fear us or find us attractive. Through posture, through voice, through hairstyle, and very possibly, very early on, through what we chose to wrap ourselves in. We actually have evidence that early humans were painting their bodies with pigment as far back as 200,000 years ago, even earlier than the lice evidence. Which means the instinct to visually communicate something about yourself may have come before clothing itself. We were decorating ourselves before we were dressing ourselves. And the leap from painting your skin to choosing a specific hide to wear isn't a big one. Suddenly you're asking, whose hide is this? Did I take it down myself? What does wearing it say about me? Congratulations, you've just invented fashion. Needles change everything. For a huge stretch of early human history, clothing was rough. A hide thrown over the shoulders, tied with a bit of twisted cord, cut crudely with a sharp rock. Functional, not stylish. Basically, a prehistoric trash bag. Then, around 45,000 to 50,000 years ago, the archaeological record shifts. We start finding needles, real needles, with a tiny eye bored through one end, clearly made for threading fiber and stitching material together. Fitted clothing, shaped garments, actual tailoring. The oldest confirmed eyed needle ever found came out of a cave in Siberia, carved from a hollow bird bone, polished down to something almost delicate. Think about what that actually required. Someone had to imagine a tool that didn't exist yet, carefully drill a hole through it without cracking the bone, and then use it to sew two pieces of hide together with a controlled, repeatable stitch. That's not luck. That's engineering. And that needle matters more than almost anything else from that era. Because you can survive without cave art. You can survive without decoration. But in the middle of a Siberian winter, without a sealed, fitted, properly sewn garment, you die fast. We weren't the only ones doing it. Here's a part that usually gets left out, mostly because it messes with the modern humans invented everything narrative. Neanderthals were making clothing too, and doing it long before they ever crossed paths with us. We found scraped animal bones and specialized stone tools clearly built for working leather at Neanderthal sites. Their bodies were also built differently. Stockier, shorter limbs, different fat distribution, all signs of long-term adaptation to serious cold. For them, clothing wasn't a lifestyle choice. It was mandatory. Then there's the Denisovans, a whole separate branch of ancient humans we didn't even know existed until 2010, discovered from a single finger bone in that same Siberian cave. In those same layers, right alongside the needle, researchers found polished, pierced ornaments, decorative items, possibly meant for garments. A group of people we barely know anything about were already thinking about how they looked. So the drive to get dressed wasn't some one-off human quirk. Multiple separate species in different corners of the world landed on the same solution independently, which raises a strange question. Is clothing a human thing, or is it just what any sufficiently smart, cold, social creature eventually figures out? Clothes became a language. Here's the truly odd part. If clothing were purely practical, every culture on Earth would have converged on the single most efficient design for their climate and just stopped there. Thick animal hide in the Arctic, light woven fiber in the tropics, same shapes everywhere, forever. That is not remotely what happened. Instead, humans immediately turned clothing into a language. Certain garments were reserved for religious leaders. Rulers wore things ordinary people were forbidden to touch. The dead were dressed in specific ways, depending on their status. Some of the oldest surviving fabric fragments weren't just plain cloth. They were dyed, deliberately in multiple colors. Somebody, tens of thousands of years ago, looked at a perfectly functional piece of woven material and decided it needed to be a different shade, not for warmth, for meaning. We turned clothing into a way of saying, I belong here. I hold this rank. I'm mourning. I'm celebrating. I'm dangerous. I'm available. I'm sacred. No other species does this. Peacocks show off. Cuttlefish shift color. But none of them are choosing a message based on culture, memory, and personal identity. That part is entirely, uniquely ours. When clothing became survival itself, somewhere between about 120,000 and 70,000 years ago, the planet went through a brutal cold stretch. Temperatures dropped hard. Ice expanded. Huge parts of Africa dried up. Food sources collapsed, and the human population may have fallen to somewhere as low as 10 to 30,000 people total. We were, by some estimates. So here's my question for you. If you had the chance, would you go back and live completely naked out on the savannah? Let me know down in the comments. I read every single one. And if you like this, make sure you're subscribed, because there's a lot more like this coming. See you in the next one.